Welcome again to Math 800 Pre-Algebra. Today we are doing section 7.4, problem solving with percents. Our objectives: 1. To solve percent application problems, and 2. To solve problems involving percent of increase or decrease. Percent application problems can be solved using either the percent equation or the percent proportion. The percent equation. Depending on the circumstance, you should think of it in one of the following ways. Part equals percent times whole. This is what we've been working with so far. However, for some word problems, it might make more sense to think of it as the new thing is a percent of the starting thing, or the change is the percent of the original, or some subset is the percent of the total. Use whatever scenario makes the most sense for this situation. We can also use percent proportions. It would be the same relationships. The original percent over 100 is part over whole, or again, percent over 100 is the subset of a total, or percent over 100 is new over starting, or percent over 100 is change over original. I will not require that you use any particular one, but you should know how to do both, because certain circumstances it's easier to use the equation, and other times it's easier to use the proportion. Example: a new low-income housing project charges 30% of a family's income as rent. The Smiths' family income is $1,260 per month. How much will the Smiths pay for rent? We'll do it the first way using the percent equation. So first read the problem. Identify what is unknown. In this case, it's the amount of rent. Then identify the knowns. 30% of the income is paid for rent, and the income is $1,260. Assign a variable for your unknown. You will only ever have one unknown for these. In this case, the unknown is the amount paid for rent, so we'll let that be n. Now we will create an equation. Sometimes it can be helpful to write a sentence to lead to your equation. So for example, I'm going to recap and say 30% of a family's income is the rent. So 30%, in an equation we must use the decimal or the fraction, so we'll use 0.30. Of is multiplication. A family's income, which we were given, 1,260, is the rent which we're trying to find, Rn. This is not required, this sentence, but it can be very helpful in building your equation. You will need to show me what equation you're using, and you will need to tell me what your variable is and what it represents. In this case, n is the amount paid for rent. If you don't have this sentence, you will not get full credit. Now we will solve this. Some of the numbers can be a little nasty, so if you want to use a calculator to double check your arithmetic for this section, that's okay. But remember that that exam is no calculator whatsoever. I'll give you arithmetic that's pretty straightforward, but you still need to be able to do it. In this case, we'd multiply 0.30 times 1,260, and we'll get 378 equals n. Then make sure to state your answer with units. The Smith family will pay $378 for rent. It is a good idea to check your answer to see if it makes sense. In this case, 378 makes sense because 10% of the 1,260 is $126. So 30% would be 3 times that, which is exactly 378. Therefore, our answer is accurate. Now we will do the exact same problem, but instead we'll solve it using a percent proportion. Most of the steps are the same. You still need to read the problem and identify the unknown, amount of rent, and the known. 30% of income is paid for rent, and $1,260 is their monthly income. You still have to assign a variable, so let n be the amount paid for rent. Only instead of putting it into an equation, instead put it into a proportion and start by writing out in words what two things you're comparing. In this case, we're comparing the rent to the total income. The rent is a subset and the total income is the total. The percent over 100, 100 is always your total, and 30% goes with the amount for rent. We don't know the actual amount for rent, but we know the total income is 1,260. Now we will solve this proportion. Multiply both sides by the denominators, 1,000 and 1,260. The hundreds cancel on the left, the 1,260s cancel on the right. Multiply and you get 37,800 equals 100n. Divide both sides by 100 and we get the same answer of 378. The rest of the problem is still the same. State our answer and check it to make sure it makes sense. So again, it is entirely up to you whether you want to use proportions or equations. I personally go back and forth between both of them. Another example. When Britta received her first $180 paycheck as a math tutor, 12.5% was withheld for federal income tax. How much was withheld? So if we read the problem, the unknown is the amount withheld for taxes. What is known is that 12.5% was withheld and that her total paycheck was $180. The only unknown is the amount withheld for taxes, so we'll let that be n. If we create an equation, we're using our percent times whole equals part. Our percent is 12.5. Notice how I converted it to the decimal instead of the mixed number 12.5. That's entirely up to you. Our whole paycheck is 180, and we don't know the subset, which is the part or how much you pay in taxes. To solve it, you must put the percent into a decimal, 0.125. We're going to actually do that arithmetic, and you should get 22.5. Since this is a money answer, you should add the extra zero and say $22.50 was withheld from Britta's paycheck. We can check the solution. It makes sense because 10% would be $18. 12.5% is a little more than 18, so 10% is 18. 12.5% is a little more than 10%, so the amount paid should be a little more than 18, which it is. So our answer is $22.50. Another example. On a 15-point quiz, Zanita earned 13 points. What percent correct is this to the nearest whole percent? Be careful with these kinds of problems. Every once in a while you'll get a problem where they tell you that she earned 13 points or got 13 correct, but instead of asking you for the percent correct, they'll ask you for the percent wrong or vice versa. So always double check to make sure you're comparing the same thing. So both correct or both wrong. If you're given one is correct and you're trying to find the percent wrong or vice versa, then you need to do some additional arithmetic. Okay, read the problem. Our unknown is the percent that was correct. What is known is that she earned 13 out of 15 points. Our variable will be for our unknown percent. We'll let it be p. Our equation, again, we're using the percent times whole equals part. The percent is unknown. The whole is how many points were available on the test, which is 15. The part is what she got correct, which is 13. Solve this, divide both sides by 15, and we get a repeating decimal. For all of these problems, write your final answer with the percents to the nearest tenth. So remember, 0.86 repeating is 0.8666666, and when you move it over, you're going to get 86.666666, and so you're actually going to round it to 87%. In this case, we went to the nearest whole percent. If it was to the nearest tenth of a percent, it would be 86.7%. Be careful to see where the directions tell you to round, particularly with My Math Lab. They will mark you wrong if you round to the wrong place. So, Zanita had 87% correct, rounded to the nearest whole percent. If we check the solution, that makes sense. She got most of the problems correct, so she should be close to 100%, and 87% is fairly close to 100%. Your checks can be varying degrees of accurate. Generally speaking, I would recommend just making sure your answer is in the right ballpark. You don't need to get it, don't put a lot of time and effort into the check. You just want to see if you're in the right ballpark.